time for a tire rotation on my Raptor. It's 2018. I just put these tires on in January. They have about 5,000 miles on them. Tires are good tires. They're cheap tires. They're good tires. Soft compound. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You just don't get as many miles out of them. But again, they were under $200 per tire. It's a 35, 12.5 on a 17-inch wheel. I really like my stock alloy wheels that the Raptor came with, but I don't like how tucked in they were. So I chose to put on wheel spacers. I think they look like 1.5 inches. They may have been an inch. Once we get into them, I'll take a quick measurement. I can't remember what they were. But they make the wheel pretty much set flush with the edge of the fender. And that is the look that I like, and that's the route that I chose to take. A lot of people aren't comfortable running wheel spacers, and that's fine. I haven't had a problem. I've run them on several vehicles, and I keep them torqued down like they're supposed to be. And that will bring us to one of the tools that we're going to use today for this tire rotation that a lot of people neglect. But let's get started. So what we're going to use here, I like to use the 1/2 inch impact for breaking the tires off the truck. But when I go to put them back on, I don't even like to snug them down with this, because this thing is rated in like hundreds of foot-pounds. So I like to use this little guy that's rated in, it's like 1,200 inch-pounds. So you're not going to over-torque them with this, but you'll get them tight enough so that you're not sitting there with your ratchet having to manually, tighten down the lug nuts. But once you get the lug nut on there tight, like I said, I've got 2018 F-150 with the alloy wheels. The owner's manual calls for 150 foot-pounds on each lug nut. It's a metric 14 millimeter stud. So in this case, I need the 21 millimeter, and I have my torque wrench set to 150 foot-pounds. And like I said, I've never had any issues with wheel spacers coming loose. I feel like the majority of the issues with the wheel spacers is they're not torqued properly. You can't see the nuts for them because it's behind the face of the wheel, so you don't really monitor it. The torque of the nut, they end up coming loose, and then they end up shearing off your stock studs on your vehicle, or they end up cracking because of uneven load. Even in the case of no wheel spacers, when I do a tire rotation or installation, I always get the torque wrench out, and if the owner's manual doesn't specify, or it's an older vehicle and the owner manual is gone, there's plenty of places online that you can see what the torque spec is for a bolt based on its diameter. So going over some of the other tools we're using, chalk block, very important, especially ideally you would do this on a flat surface. I have a pretty substantial grade on my driveway, and it's really the only place I have to work on vehicles right now. The truck doesn't even come close to fitting in the garage. So due to the grade, even if you didn't have a grade, it's still a good idea to chalk those wheels. And we have 2 jack stands here. Anytime you're using a floor jack, you always want to try and get a jack stand underneath it. Hydraulics shouldn't really be trusted. And the pad on there is really small, and sometimes you don't have it set just right and it can fall. I've never had a vehicle fall off of this kind of floor jack, but it can happen, and I have definitely had a vehicle fall off of a farm jack, or what they call a Jeep jack. A popular brand is High Lift. I've definitely had a vehicle fall off of one of those. So if you're using a high lift jack for working on your vehicle, without a question, use floor jacks. The last thing you want to do is die under your own car. So those are the tools that we're going to be using for this tire rotation. Let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do, like we discussed, is throw this chalk block under one of these front tires. We're going to jack up the rear end by the center diff, put a jack stand under each side of the axle tube, and that'll give us access to both rear tires. And then we'll use the floor jack and a jack stand to get this front tire off the vehicle and swapped with one of the rear tires. Now we're moving to the back of the vehicle. We're gonna put this floor jack underneath the center diff. If you don't chalk your front tires when you lift up both of your rear tires, if your parking brake is set or your vehicle is in park, like right now the vehicle is in park, it's not going to go anywhere unless you were to overload the parking paw in the transmission. But sitting like it is, that wouldn't happen. But even if you put it in park and set the parking brake only applies pressure on the rear brake pads. So once you lift it up, it's going to roll backwards, and the floor jack has wheels, so that means this entire vehicle is going to run us over. So we have the front wheel chalked like we just did. We're going to lift it up. It's probably going to roll back like an inch until it gets that pressure on that rubber chalk block, and then it'll stop moving. We'll get these floor jacks under it, and you don't want to put too much angle on these floor jacks because they could tip over. This isn't really enough, so once we have those down, we'll be a little more secure from the vehicle rolling down the driveway as well. When positioning these jack stands underneath your rear axle, things you want to avoid are your hard brake lines. They run across there. Some of them may run underneath the axle. This vehicle doesn't. I've seen others where they do, especially if somebody decided to reroute them when replacing them on an older vehicle. But you want to get them as far to the outside as you can, which really, they're a little closer to the center than I would like, but it'll be stable enough. You don't want to go up against the axle tube if you can help. You want to spread that load out as wide as you can for stability. But you also don't want to get into the shock or the spring perch, because if you start trying to use the shock bracket, that's just thin steel that could bend, and then the load could shift, and if you don't have a wheel on, the vehicle could fall on you. So we've got them in a clear location on the axle tube, spread out as far as we can, as wide of stance as we can possibly get. And then now as we slowly lower it down, we just want to make sure that that axle tube is set in the center of that saddle. We don't want it set on the edge. We want it set down in the saddle of the top of the jack stand. All right, that's good. And we can give it the old shake test while we don't stand behind it. It's in there solid. So let's move on to the front. This seems to be the best location for this jack stand, so let's go ahead and slowly lower it down. All right, we can just put a load on there. I still like to keep the floor jack under the vehicle where I'm working on it, just in case something happens. It's already under the vehicle, so if a bystander were to come by, the jack's already under the vehicle where I'm working on it, so it'll just be a little bit quicker for them to potentially get a vehicle off of you. If you were to lower it all the way down and move it out of the way, not in the case of this truck so much, but a small car that sits low to the ground, if the vehicle falls, a lot of times, even this being a low profile floor jack, they may not be able to get the floor jack back under there. Maybe it doesn't help you every time, but that's just my method of thinking. If something were to happen, I would want the floor jack already under the vehicle, so just to make lifting the vehicle off a little bit faster. if you don't have an impact driver to break the lug nuts loose initially, you would have to have this tire contacting the ground ever so slightly so that you could put your lug wrench on here, or your breaker bar, ratchet, whatever the case is. Because right now, if you start trying to turn on these with a lot of force from a breaker bar, it's just going to rotate the tire on you. You're not going to be able to break them loose. Like I said, they're 150 foot-pounds, so you know that's a good amount of force. So as you can see here, if you try to apply pressure, it's just going to rotate the tire on you. You're not going to be able to break it loose. It requires the sharp impacts of the driver, or you can push a block of wood under here if you're already to this point you forgot, or if you have a second shock block, you can jam it up right in here, and as the tire rotates, it'll try and pull it in. But or you can just lower it back down to where it just barely makes contact with the ground. But we have this nice Makita impact driver, so we're going to use that. So while we're here, we're just going to go ahead and retorque this wheel spacer before we move on and potentially forget about it. Now you're going to run into the same problem as we discussed earlier, where once you start applying pressure on these nuts, you know, this is just going to rotate on you. And we're talking about 150 foot-pounds, which is, it's a lot, but it's not too much for, you know, what I think this to handle. You know, this is designed to stop I don't even know what the gross vehicle weight rating on this is, but we'll just say 10,000 pound payload. You know, and you have 4 of them, so this bracket should be able to handle this. So I'll find a screwdriver that'll fit in between the fins on the brake rotor. This one might be too big. There we go. Through the caliper bracket into the space between the fins on the rotor. Now we're locked in there pretty good. So let's get the socket for this, the torque wrench, and check the torque on these. So just as you would when you do your lug nuts, you want to do a cross pattern. So we're going to start with this one here. We'll move to this one, then we'll go to that one, this one, and then number 5 and number 6. Now we've got our wheel spacer torqued, and looking at it, it is 1.5 inch wheel spacer. So if you're interested in getting some wheel spacers for your Raptor to run your stock alloy wheels, 1.5 inch seems to be perfect. Once I get it set back on the ground, we can look down the side of the vehicle, and then you can find for yourself if 1.5 inch is too much, or you know, if you want more. But I find 1.5 inch is just perfect. And I just didn't really want to order the same wheels that everybody else is ordering and running on their Raptor. There are probably less Raptors with the stock wheels on at this point than there are Raptors with the Method or the popular Icon wheels. And I like the look of the stock Raptor wheel quite a bit, so eventually I may paint them black, but we'll see. This one's all tightened up. Let's go pull the tire off the rear of the vehicle so we can bring it up here. so that's all the tightening that wheel's going to get for now. Once we get it set back on the ground, we're going to go around the entire truck with the torque wrench set at 150 foot-pounds and hit all of the lug nuts as it sets on the ground. So let's move to the front wheel and get that one put on now. Alright, lug centric to hub centric. The stock arrangement on this truck and most vehicles, the hub will have a lip that protrudes out, and your factory wheel will set on this. You can see the contact marks if you look closely where my factory wheel is sitting on this, because this wheel spacer allows the stock hub ring to fit inside of it, and then it too has its own hub ring, and this takes the load of the wheel and the vehicle as well as the lug nuts. You're not going to get away from these taking the load, but this will also help. This especially helps when centering your wheel. So when you put your wheel back on, you don't really have to worry about it being off center, because this centers it. If you get a wheel, if you use your stock wheels, or if you get an aftermarket wheel with the same hub bore diameter as this hub or your factory wheel would have. In the case this isn't here, you then have lug centric, and that becomes more important in that case to start on when you're putting your wheel on, you hang your wheel off of your lugs and you start with your top lug nut, and that as you pull that in tighter, it will center the wheel on that cone shape, this cone shape right here, because they're essentially self-centering. Then what you do is you start with the bottom one, the opposing one, in the case of even number, or in the case of an odd number, you're gonna have to rely on your star pattern, or skipping a stud and then going to the next. But in the case of this vehicle, if it didn't have hub centric, or you put spacers on it that didn't have this, start with your top one, get it on there fairly tight. You still want the wheel to hang loosely as you place your second one on here at the bottom, and then that will help you center your wheel on the hub without this ring. And then you'll do the same thing as you normally do with the Titan sequence. Then you would put this one on and get it somewhat tight, and then that one on and get it somewhat tight, this one and then that one, and that will help center your wheel. And most of the times when people have issues with off-balance wheels due to the lack of a hub ring or a hub-centric deal, is because their wheel is not centered on the hub. But if you use that method, I've found, because I did have non-hub centric on a car in the past, but you know, I never had an issue with it, because I always did that method of starting at the top and letting the wheel hang loose, tightening it down, not all the way. Obviously you'd have your wheel in here, and the mating surface that would match this cone, but starting with the top one, letting the wheel hang freely, and then this, doing the bottom one, then working my way around, and then, you know, tightening them. You don't want to just crank it all the way down to your, 150 foot-pounds. You want to step, 90 foot-pounds, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, and then take it up to, 110, and then up to 150. And that'll help center your wheel on a non-hub centric hub. So, there's a very long explanation of something that is not necessarily that difficult to understand, but if you have any more questions, you can throw me a comment in the comments below, and I'll try and get to it. And there's a lot of information online. There's a lot of information about that online if you want to filter through the forums and people blasting wheel spacers or adapters. And technically this isn't a wheel spacer, it is a wheel adapter. A wheel spacer would be like a 1/4 inch thick piece of aluminum or steel that you'd put on your factory studs that would you'd stack on there with your wheel. This is technically considered a wheel adapter. It has its own set of studs, and this is common if you were trying to switch from a, I think it's 6x135 to, say, you know, some other lug pattern. If you had a different set of wheels that you wanted to put on here from a different vehicle, you could get a wheel adapter. But in this case, it just adapts a 6x135 to a 6x135. So it's not technically a wheel spacer, even though it does space your wheels out 1.5 inches. So there you have it. That's wheel spacers all wrapped up. Let's get that other rear tire off and get this tire rotation moving. Almost let me forget. Alright, while we're talking about wheels and tires, I'm gonna teach you something today. Some of you may already know this. Most people don't that I've talked to, and it's going to drive you crazy for the rest of your life. After you hear this, I guess it's a secret, but if you look at your sidewall, not all tire manufacturers do it, but the ones that do, we should take advantage of it. Yellow mark. That is the lightest part of the tire. That should be aligned with the valve stem. It is obviously not. If you were to align that with the valve stem, you'd be putting the lightest part of the tire over the heaviest part of the wheel, because this is your sensor. The rest of the wheel is bare. That is the heaviest point in the wheel, lightest point in the tire. Align them, less wheel weights. Less wheel weights, cheaper balance, easier balance, more accurate balance. Now, in the case of this, we have a red dot. Red dot, tires are not manufactured perfect. They're very close. With the new radials, they get very close, but they're not manufactured perfectly weighted, nor are they manufactured perfectly round. Red dot is the highest point in the tire, so it is in a very small scale. If you watch one of my previous videos where I complain about the Pro Comp 40-inch mud tires, that is another good explanation of high spots and low spots in tires. In this case, this is the high spot of the tire. So red dot priority goes with the low point in the tire if indicated by your wheel manufacturer. If the wheel manufacturer does not indicate the low point in the wheel, the red dot takes priority over the yellow dot to be aligned with the valve stem. So priority 1, red dot to low point indicated on wheel. Priority 2, red dot to valve stem. Priority 3, in the event you don't have a red dot, you would utilize the yellow dot to align with the valve stem. But I've used a lot of tire shops. I go through a lot of just trying different tires on vehicles. I've done a lot of manual breakdowns and remounts on my own because the Pro Comp's having the issue, and then tire mounting services that apparently don't know how to mount tires. So common. I've yet to meet one that does it properly without me asking. And then even still they want to argue about it when it's a Google search away. But whatever. Little information on how to get a better balance out of your wheel and tire combo. So another thing we can discuss is why I decided to put brand new tires on a brand new F-150. The Raptor comes with a load range C equivalent tire. So I haul trailers every now and then, and it doesn't take very long to max out a load range C, which not only can put you in danger for a blowout, the more flex you have in the sidewall, the hotter your tire is going to get, and it could potentially have a failure on the sidewall. So I wanted a load range D or E, and in this case equivalent, I got a load range D equivalent. So it does it ride a little more rough, yes, but I can use it as a truck, which is what I bought it for. Sure, it's, you know, a Raptor, but I will sacrifice a little bit of ride quality for having a truck that's actually usable. And load range C tires on one of my trucks is not usable. So I went with the load range equivalent E tire, and I say equivalent. You know, also we can talk about plies. Tires don't have like 12 or 14 plies anymore. They usually have like 4 plies or 3 plies, and the biggest difference is what the sidewall is constructed out of. If it's Kevlar or steel or whatever the case is. But so a lot of people get confused when I start talking about your ply. It's a load range like D or E equivalent, or a 14 ply equivalent. So a lot of people get confused on that. So the ones on here, load range E or 14 ply equivalent, but the realistic number is the load index 121. So you can look that up online, but here you see right here, it's a 10 ply rating. So sorry, 10 ply, not 14 ply. 10 ply rating, load range E. And then we have our max load right here is pounds. Where's pounds? 3,195 pounds per tire. And that's important on the rear end. When you start loading a heavy trailer with a lot of tongue weight, you can max these tires out fairly quick, especially if you have stuff in the bed like a four-wheeler or hunting, camping gear. So when I went to get the 39-inch 1250s, so it's a tall skinny tire, when I went to get these mounted on these wheels, I made sure, and I told the company mounting the tires that I wanted the valve stems aligned with the red dots. They didn't understand why. I said, I don't care, do it that way. They did it, and for a 39-inch tire, these have very minimal weights. There's you got a little strip right back here, but you know, compared to most 40s, people either just don't even bother balancing them, or they run a ton of BBs in them. But these 39-inch Canati mud terrains are balanced out perfect. This truck rides so smooth. And see, same here, we have the red dot aligned with the valve stem. And let's see if we can find a weight on here. And this has a little more weight, but still, I mean, not nearly as much as if that wasn't aligned. Like I said, these ride fantastic. These are 128Q with the load range, or is it, got a 10 ply rating and a load range E. We got 3,970 pounds. And this truck will probably see quite a bit more weight than that truck, but that truck still gets used as a truck. It does not get babied. And I don't keep it very clean. I need to be better about that. It's filthy. But that wraps up the what was supposed to be a short video of rotating tires on the Raptor, and then turned into a conversation of tire manufacturers and tire mounters. But it's good information. It's things that I didn't learn until I had like major issues with those pro comps, and then I started doing a bunch of research and figuring things out. But it's good knowledge to have. So the next time you go get tires mounted up, if they have red or yellow dots, make sure they align them with the valve stem. Don't let them talk you out of it. It's the way it's supposed to be. It's why the manufacturer does it. So take care, have a good one. Thanks for watching. If you don't mind, hit the subscribe button, and you know, I look forward to the next video, and I appreciate all of you viewers that are here in the beginning. So take care and have a good one.